I once worked as a security officer at the Stanley Hotel, one of the most famous budget hotels in the US during the 80s. They offered very good treatment for employees, so I accepted the job immediately during the interview without a second thought. Gradually, I began to realize that the job was not as simple as I had initially thought. About a month after I started working, I met an incredibly wealthy guest named Richard Ramirez. However, he was truly a bad seed, often changing girlfriends as if changing shirts, each time renting a more expensive room with the new girl. Such a wasteful playboy. Strangely, he only stayed at the hotel during the day, as if vanishing into thin air at night. But there was one night when I saw him returning to his room at midnight. I wasn't sure if it was because I was too sleepy and saw it wrong, but I truly saw him dragging a girl into the room, her clothes stained with what looked like blood. I froze for a moment, undecided whether to knock on his door to check or leave them to their privacy. Eventually, I returned to my desk and acted as if I saw nothing. In the following days, I continued to see Richard with new girlfriends as usual. Setting aside my suspicions about him, I had a thought. What if I wandered around the hotel at night? Would I encounter any ghosts? So I took a risk one evening. Using my employee card, I successfully sneaked up to the rooftop area of the Stanley Hotel. While walking around the balcony area, I suddenly heard a loud bang from the water tank area. Being a risk-taker by nature, I went to check it out. As I approached the water tank, I noticed that the lid had been oddly displaced, as if someone had just opened it and hadn't managed to close it yet. In the darkness, the strong, musty smell was unpleasant, but curiosity drove me forward. I took out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shone it inside the tank. The flickering light reflected off the water's surface, making it hard to see clearly. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a large object floating on the water. My heart was pounding. I hurriedly called for more security and asked them to come immediately. While waiting, I used a sample retrieval stick to pull the object closer. As it gradually became visible, I was horrified to realize it was the body of a man. Even though the victim's face was mutilated, I immediately recognized it was Richard. The police were called, and an urgent investigation was initiated. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about that gruesome image. Being one of the first on the scene and a hotel employee, I was allowed to review the security footage. My heart stopped when the figure of the murderer appeared. According to the footage, a man fully covered in a mask was continuously beating Richard with a hammer. After ensuring Richard had breathed his last, the killer continued to take out a dagger from his side and repeatedly stabbed Richard's face. The investigation continued intensively, with detectives searching every corner of the hotel and every detail of Richard's life to find a motive for the murder. One day, a shocking revelation came to light when the police discovered that Richard's secret lover was the wife of a wealthy man who was later identified as the murderer. Stories from witnesses and evidence gathered indicated that this man was none other than Richard's stepfather. He, a powerful and influential figure, had discovered the illicit relationship between Richard and his woman a few weeks before the murder. Additionally, Richard had killed the lover of his stepfather after raping her. Putting together the events of that night, I realized the girl Richard dragged into his room, covered in blood, was indeed his stepfather's lover. This betrayal had driven him to lose control and nurture a desire for revenge. The man had been monitoring Richard for a long time, seeking the right opportunity to act. He had carefully left no trace that could directly link back to him, even using a mask to hide his face during the execution of the crime. The use of a hammer was to ensure that Richard would not survive the attack. His reason for slashing Richard's face was his extreme hatred for that handsome face. It reminded him of Richard's biological father, who was also his brother. When the police announced this evidence and Richard's stepfather was arrested, both the hotel and the media were shaken. Richard's mother, although heartbroken by the sudden death of her son, still pleaded for the court to be lenient on her husband. In the end, Richard's stepfather was sentenced to death, Everyone was shocked that a family relationship could become so toxic and dangerous. And I, despite having witnessed many horrifying incidents at the Stanley Hotel, was still deeply shaken by this case. My story began when I stepped into the quaint Beaumont Hotel on a rainy autumn afternoon. I am a writer seeking inspiration for my next horror novel and had heard that this place was rife with spine-chilling tales. I was assigned room 313, a room deep within the hotel's last corridor. The hotel manager mentioned it was the best remaining room, and I was the last lucky person. However, I felt that there was an undertone of misfortune in his words. As the room door closed behind me, a piercing cold breeze swept through, giving me the chills. Room 313 looked like a scene from the 1920s, with its antique bed, dark drapes, and a desk lamp emitting a sharp yellow light. The air was cold and damp, as if it hadn't been warmed in decades. The first night passed relatively quietly, but on the second night, strange things began to happen. Around midnight, I heard loud footsteps overhead. Initially, I thought it might be from the room above, but then I remembered room 313 was at the top of the hotel. The footsteps continued, relentless and unending. I tried to rationalize the unexplainable and decided to investigate. The hallway was completely silent and empty. Returning to my room, I noticed the stool that had been in the corner was now by the bed. This unsettled me, but I tried to reassure myself it was just my memory playing tricks. The third night was worse. At about 3 a.m., I woke up feeling someone sitting on the bed. The moonlight was dim, but I could clearly see a vague figure sitting silently, staring at me. I felt paralyzed, as if pinned down by a shadow. I closed my eyes hard, trying to force myself back to sleep. When I awoke the next day, I realized it had been the most terrifying night of my life. However, as sunlight filtered through the windows, all the unsettling feelings from the night seemed to vanish. I decided to walk around the hotel to learn more about its history and to gather my spirits. While wandering, I accidentally overheard a conversation between two staff members discussing a previous guest who had mysteriously disappeared from room 313. They mentioned a diary left in the room, filled with entries about even stranger phenomena than I had experienced. My heart tightened with curiosity and excitement. I decided to steal the journal for inspiration for my story. Knowing I needed access to the manager to get the diary, I decided to use my appearance and conversational skills to charm him. During dinner, I offered him a drink and began talking about my writing career, emphasizing my interest in mysterious and mystical stories. He seemed intrigued by the topic and gradually opened up. As we talked, I subtly brought up the strange occurrences in room 313 and expressed my curiosity about the hotel's history. Slightly inebriated, he began to reveal some records he had kept, which he thought were just urban legends. I convinced him that reviewing these documents could help me craft a great novel. Eventually, he agreed to lead me to his office so I could examine them. In the office, while the manager went to fetch the documents, I noticed an odd antique key on his desk. Curious, I took it and found it fit a small door behind the bookshelf, a secret passage. I sneaked in and found myself in a deep basement corridor. In the basement, I discovered a strange room with large tanks filled with a clear liquid. Approaching, I was horrified to realize they contained the preserved bodies of previous hotel guests. Their eyes were wide open, seemingly staring right at me. In my panic, I didn't notice the manager had been watching me from behind. He appeared with a terrifying smile. My head felt foggy, and I passed out. The last thing I heard before blacking out was,
"Welcome to my special collection,"
he said as he locked the room door.
"And now, you will become the next part of it."
When I awoke, I found myself locked in a VIP room in the basement, where he prepared for his next operation. In desperation, I looked around for an escape and noticed a small sewer cover in the corner of the bathroom. After struggling to remove the cover, I finally managed to open it. Realizing this was my only chance, I quickly crawled inside, despite the foul smell and the overwhelming darkness. I crawled in absolute darkness, only the sound of dripping water echoing in the tight, damp space. My fear intensified as I heard rapid footsteps above, seemingly the manager realizing my escape and searching. I tried to move silently, but every breath seemed to betray my location. After about an hour of struggling through the sewer, I found an exit. I struggled out of the sewer and crawled into a nearby forest as the sky began to lighten. I felt free, yet filled with fear and confusion. I dared not look back at the Beaumont Hotel, now knowing it harbored darker and more horrifying secrets than any ghost story I had ever imagined. With my clothes dirty and my body exhausted, I walked on, determined to escape the dreadful shadow of the hotel and report to the police what had happened. Yet deep inside, I knew my story was just beginning. The secrets I had uncovered at the Beaumont Hotel were not just elements of a horror story, but a part of real life I could never forget. When I reported everything to the police, they were skeptical. Although I detailed everything I saw in the hotel's basement, from the tanks with bodies to the bizarre diaries and the manager's secrets, the truth was so outlandish it made my story sound like a macabre joke. However, after much insistence and explanation, they finally agreed to investigate. When the police officers arrived at the hotel and conducted their inspection, they found that the manager had disappeared without a trace. The room where I had been held showed no signs of the abnormalities I described, and the tanks I mentioned were nowhere to be found. Everything seemed to have been meticulously cleaned up, leaving a void and chilling space. The investigators were perplexed and unsure about the authenticity of my testimony. I was interrogated thoroughly, and although they found no evidence to charge me, there was also not enough evidence to continue investigating the hotel. I felt desperate and abandoned, but I knew what I had seen in that basement. Determined not to let the story fade into oblivion, I returned to my home and began to write down the entire story, using the horrific details I had experienced as the foundation for my latest novel. The book's release captured public and media attention, prompting many to become interested in the secrets of the Beaumont Hotel. My novel was not just a work of horror, but also became an indirect investigation. Readers were drawn into the story and began their inquiries, leading to independent investigations. Public pressure eventually forced the police to reopen the case. In subsequent investigations, new evidence came to light as several former hotel employees came forward to share what they knew. Finally, the mysteries of the Beaumont Hotel began to unravel, though the manager was still not found. But with each page, I knew I had done the right thing by not remaining silent, by not letting the ghosts and secrets of the Beaumont Hotel be buried in darkness. In the bone-chilling cold of winter, the north wind blew through the ancient Whispering Pines Hotel, nestled on a lonely hill in a small town in Maine. This hotel, with its rich and haunted history, had once been my workplace, and it also harbored a dark secret that I could never forget. When I began my job as the night manager at the Whispering Pines, it was no longer as vibrant as in its heyday. Stories of whispers, ghosts, and mysterious deaths seemed like permanent residents, never leaving the place. The story began in 1926 when Charles and Eliza Whitmore, a wealthy couple, decided to build this hotel as a symbol of their wealth and power. However, they were unaware that the hill they chose to build on was once an overlooked Native American burial ground. Soon after the hotel was inaugurated, strange events began to occur. Guests reported hearing footsteps in the hallways at night, echoes of whispers through the thick walls, and unexplained cold drafts even though the windows were tightly shut. One night, while checking unoccupied rooms, I stumbled upon a secret door under the main staircase, leading down to a forgotten basement. In the darkness, my flashlight revealed a wall covered in ancient paintings depicting Native American rituals and sacrifices. In the center of the wall was a large painting depicting a sacrificial ritual that strikingly resembled Charles and Eliza. The more I explored, the more I realized that these rituals were not random images, but a curse that Charles and Eliza had unwittingly invoked by building the hotel over the graves of the departed. This curse bound their souls to the hotel, forcing them to relive long nights of torment and suffering. In the years that followed, a mysterious illness gradually manifested on Charles and Eliza's bodies. Their skin not only turned blood red, but also became unusually fragile. Rough patches of skin began to peel off, revealing deep cracks from which blood continuously seeped. The itching seemed endless, causing them to scratch until they severely damaged their skin. Throughout this ordeal, I was like a nanny taking care of their two young children. They had to witness the painful sight of their parents changing day by day. The agony and fear gradually took over the minds of the innocent children. One day, a beggar woman passed by the hotel and said that the blood of children could bring new life to the sick. A nonsensical statement, but it had unforeseeable consequences. When I returned to the hotel, it was too late. In their physical pain, they decided to drink the blood of their children. However, right after this horrific act was carried out, Charles and Eliza came out of their delusion and realized the abominable act they had committed. The appalling event of the hotel owners killing and drinking their children's blood shocked the public for a long time. The hotel was closed, and I was dismissed. The torment and guilt were too much for my former employers to bear. I learned soon after, both had died of heart attacks. Since the hotel changed ownership, the restless spirits of Charles and Eliza began to wander around. I still often read articles about visitors to the Whispering Pines, frequently recounting sightings of two sorrowful ghosts with cracked skin and tear-filled red eyes. They are seen wandering the hallways at night, and sometimes the sorrowful whispers of apologies can be heard. The stories of the Whispering Pines remain as a painful reminder of the past and the punishment that history has recorded. Curious guests still visit, drawn by the mystery of the hotel, but none of them can anticipate the horrific stories that these ancient walls have hidden.